Hey everyone, welcome to the designer's notes video for the USD Shadow Team White for 2026, where we go into just a little bit more detail around some of the design decisions for this particular model. First thing I want to cover is probably the colorway. So the colorway was actually accidental, a good accident I think. It's a classic colorway, black and white. You can't go wrong with a black and white skate, but it was actually based off an initial concept for trying to mimic the cuff padding setup that the carbon skates utilize. So with the carbon skates, you've got the shell and then that's wrapped around and stitched and glued with fabric and material, the lower cuff, and then you have the plastic cuff that goes on top. So the idea here was initially the concept was to get the 2.0 shadow cuff, grab the lower half and see if we could stitch glue material over the top of it and then have it come up the inside similar to the USD carbon skate and other skates that utilize that sort of design methodology to basically see if we could reduce or find another way to achieve the cuff padding on the shadow skate, because we've only really got two options, and that is the traditional method where we fix the padding to the top of the cuff using screws and rivets, or we utilize the USD Shadow Eclipse liner, which is a one piece obviously all the way up, so you don't need to find a way to attach the cuff padding to the cuff. So that was the intent there, trying to utilize that. The team in China tried to put it together. The 2.0 cuff was never really designed for that, so they were trying to stitch, trying to glue, it just really wasn't working. So we kind of scratched that idea. The second part to that design concept was designing a high top shoe, but I'll talk about a little bit more of that in a sec. So there were two parts to the initial design. One was trying to see if we could find a different way to affix the cuff padding utilizing the bottom half of the cuff. The second part was a high top shoe. In order to put forward the concept, I had a number of designs just sitting off to the side. I always wanted to do a remake of the Chris Farmer 3 skate. It's such an awesome colorway. It's one of my favorite colorways ever. So I did have this basically set up just as a template, and I just overlaid that template with that design concept. Not really thinking it would go anywhere immediately, but the team in China just got to work straight away. So they started working on the high top shoe and they tried to see if they could work out a way to affix that cuff padding to the lower cuff. And they were popping out samples utilizing this colorway. So it ended up becoming the colorway for this skate accidentally, but it's a good accident. Like I said, it's one of my favorite colorways ever on a shadow skate, and obviously updated here and there for this particular model. So the next, I guess, leading in from that would be the second part of that initial design concept was the high top shoe. Why do a high top shoe? There are many fans of the traditional foot wrap shadow where you've just got the shoe, low cut shoe, and it goes inside the skeleton, and the tongue is integrated with the 45-degree binding part, pretty much as per the classic shadow design. So we've got that, and then we've also got now the Eclipse walkable liner, which people are a fan of because there's no break in the liner, meaning that it's quite comfortable, runs all the way up. From a part manufacturing perspective, it's good for us because we don't have to have a cuff padding with all the hardware, additional hardware requirements to fix it to the cuff. It literally just runs up straight inside the shell. So that's a good thing from a manufacturing perspective. People like it, people like the comfort. It performs quite well inside the skate. The only thing that I guess people don't like is from a walkability perspective, it's not the most user-friendly, or it's not something that people generally want to be walking around in. Most people wear normal shoes, take their skates to skate park or to the spot or whatever, change out of their normal shoes, put on the liner, then put the liner inside the skate, and then they might wear it from between spots, or to take them off to grab a drink or something like that. But for the most part, it's not something that people wear on a day-to-day basis, and I understand that. People don't want to be seen walking around in these things, which is fair enough. You can just pull your pants over the top, and it does look like a normal shoe, but it's also not. They're not actually that great for driving, things like that. So a lot of adult skaters who are driving prefer just to wear their normal shoes for driving rather than put these on and then drive. So there's pros and cons, I guess. What people do like about this as well is the independent operation of the tongue versus the binding part. So on traditional shadows, you've got the tongue integrated with this binding part, which has a distinct feel to it. Some people really like that and prefer that, but some people like having the distinction between letting the binding part do its job in securing the shoe/liner at a 45-degree angle inside the skate, and then having a separate tongue to do its job to manage comfort against the buckle or the strap, and to manage forward and a bit of lateral flex as well. So that's why there's I guess that's why we've got these, or rather the pros and cons of each kind of setup, which led me to think about, well, how about a high top shoe? It's not the first time Shadow's done high top shoes before. There were some standalone Shadow shoes released many years ago, and there were a few mid-top/high top shoes released as part of that, which I really liked. I had the JC Rowe mid-top, high top shoe. I wore them almost daily as my daily shoe. I really love those shoes. So that's why we kind of looked at, well, what if we did kind of create something that's in between? It's not a low top foot wrap traditional shoe as per traditional Shadows, but it's not a super high walkable liner like the Eclipse liner. So we thought, well, let's try a high top shoe. And what we have here is the very first sample of the high top shoe. It was pretty good. It was not far off the mark. We had, what's it called? I'm trying to think. Wax canvas. Wax canvas as the outer, which isn't too bad. We use wax canvas quite a bit on a lot of our products, soft products. The only problem is it got dirty really fast and stained really fast. You're always going to get that with a white skate and white material, but that's why we've ended up going with the nylon mesh for the final version, which we can have a look at shortly. So that was the first thing. You'll notice too that it is very much based on the Eclipse walkable liner, with intention, mainly because we know that this performs well, it functions well. We just wanted to kind of mimic that, but lower it and create a high top shoe that people would feel a little more comfortable and would actually want to wear, potentially as their daily shoe, or at least wear leading into a skate session or wear afterwards for a while. The first version, as you can see, the height of the side to tongue ratio was a little bit off. So that particularly when your foot is inside it, the tongue would stick out quite a lot. It's okay, but I felt we could do better there. No one would really want to wear that with the tongue sticking up so much. So that was the first kind of thing we worked on, is to try and get the height of the sides of the high top shoe relative to the height of the tongue. The tongue has to be a certain height for it to perform its function in doing managing forward flex, lateral flex, and providing comfort against the buckle. So it needs to be a certain height. It can't be too low, or it doesn't achieve that. But at the same time, a lot of tongues on liners these days can just get taller and taller and taller. So I didn't want it to be too tall either. I just wanted it to be tall enough to serve its purpose and function. Then again, with the sides, with this one, it was too low. I didn't want it to come too high either, because if it got too high on the sides, then we start going into the realm of the eclipse liner again, which defeats the point. So trying to get the height of the tongue and the height of the sides married off together was the first thing I wanted to work on. Outside that, it was pretty good. In terms of design, we had pull tab on the back. It didn't have a 45-degree eyelet, so we've added that to the final version just for those people who really want to secure their foot at a 45-degree angle inside the shoe. We went for bare eyelets as well, and soft parts for all the lacing as much as possible. That's mainly to achieve the fact, or mainly because the 45-degree binding is pressing down with quite a bit of pressure on the shoe, on the forefoot there. So I didn't want metal eyelets potentially causing a pressure point. So trying to keep that as soft as possible through that lacing area. As per the eclipse liner, we used a welded TPU part, which is really durable and always looks nice as well. So that was a no-brainer. TPU leather patch on the back, again, similar to the eclipse liner. In terms of the tongue, what I went for initially was we're just looking at popular tongues across the MyFit liner range, and a lot of feedback and comments around the MyFit Pro liner tongue, pretty sure. So that's what the tongue is based off. It's got a PU strip inside the tongue, so it holds shape, and it's quite comfortable. I've tested this quite a bit. I think it holds shape quite well. It doesn't twist too much inside the skate. Not so much though that it starts to move right around. I think there is a little bit of movement, but not so much that it twists all the way around and starts to, impede the skating. Leather patch on the tongue with a embossed USD Shadow, which I thought was quite nice. That's there for aesthetics, but I also left it open at the sides so you can potentially pass your laces through if you really want to try and center it and keep it secure, and potentially use your buckle to pass through there as well. So that's a nice touch. I've never used it. I didn't have to use it. I think when you lace it up to the top eyelet, combined with the buckle, the 45-degree, all the other fixation and securing points, I didn't find it needed that extra level of tightening. Tongue moved around just a little bit, but certainly not as much as, or not as bad as I've had in the past with some liners. What else? Oh, the initial version didn't have what's called eye shape. Eye shape is the padding that sits in the back of a liner that sticks out, that helps keep your heel locked into the back of the shoe or the liner. So that was missing out of here. And that is something that I have noticed previously on old Shadow variants, even very first versions, is even with a shoe, liner, whatever it may be, without that eye shape or that extra padding, is that sometimes whilst this is great in holding the shoe inside the skate, that if your heel actually had the potential to lift inside the shoe a little bit, if that makes sense. So shadow skaters would know that there is that potential for you to actually get heel lift inside the shoe rather than the shoe lifting inside the skate. So that was the next thing we addressed, is to put in some eye shape there so you got a bit of heel lock inside the shoe as well. The outsole, I have talked a little bit about the outsole, but I will take the opportunity just to go over it again because there was a lot of design decisions made with the outsole that people might not be aware of, and just some of the rationale as to why we went down a particular path with the outsole. So most people should be aware, or in case you're not, the molds for the original Shadow outsole were lost. Don't know exactly how they were lost. I think during a factory move or a supplier moved to a different factory and they were lost in that process. So that's why for a number of years you didn't see the typical the typical Shadow outsole on any of the models. They were just some generic off-the-shelf outsole, which for the most part did their job, but they weren't designed for the skate. They didn't have heel lock. They just didn't really provide what I wanted or what Shadow fans would really want out of an outsole, which is just an off-the-shelf thing chucked inside the skate. So thankfully, with the boss man's blessing, we were able to design a brand new outsole, which wouldn't have been cheap. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity to do that. And the former designer, Kenneth, really put in the work on putting all of his design knowledge and power into the design of the outsole. In terms of what I wanted to see on the new outsole, there are a few things. So firstly, it was the heel lock extension needed to come out far enough to actually provide heel lock. The original Shadow heel lock extension didn't actually come out that far. When you've got the cuff padding and then the padding of the shoe, it actually pushes the shoe a little bit forward inside the skate. And when you've only got a heel lock extension that was like, I think it was like 2 or 3 millimeters, it pretty much almost never engaged. So that was the first design consideration in terms of the new design, is making sure that that heel lock extension was long enough so it would actually engage with the cutout of the cuff and provide that heel lock. The next part was making sure that it was low profile. The generic ones that were used over a number of years weren't as low as they could be. Some people didn't mind that because it gave them kind of a forward lean inside the skate, and some people felt that it positioned them better. But overall, we were talking about, you know, this sort of a gap between where your heel sat and where it meets the frame. And there is almost no skate on the market where that sort of a gap exists between the base of your foot and the frame. So we really wanted to reduce that down. And that's why on the new one, it is very slim, or as close fitting to the sole plate as possible. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but you can see that you've just got a very thin rubber layer across the bottom there. And then above that, you've got a EVA foam that runs from the toe and slightly thickens out towards the heel. This is pretty much mirroring, because I've got an old first generation Shadow foot wrap, which I cut up. I know I shouldn't have done that, but I wanted to see and make sure that this pretty much mirrors the height of the original foot wrap. What that means is your foot overall is as close as possible to the sole plate and the frame, which ultimately gives you better performance. For those people who do want a raised heel, then you still have the option to put a thicker insole inside the liner or the shoe. It's still that option if you want a slightly raised heel. The other consideration too around that whole outsole design was to whether or not we design it with the shock absorber, the traditional shock pad. We did talk about whether or not it should be designed around that and whether or not we wanted to remove the shock pad. Ultimately, we decided to keep the shock pad and design it to work in conjunction because the shock pad provides shock absorption. It's a good shock absorber. It's designed to fit inside the shell, and both cuffs were designed in terms of the width and the space and the void in which needs to be filled inside the base of the cuff. They've been designed around the existence of that shock absorber. So if we remove the shock absorber, we would have had to make modifications to the cuff, particularly around the back here to remove this ridge. As you may remember, a decision was made to remove the shock absorber from the first USD Shadow models, which meant that the liner didn't sit properly inside the skate. The heel would slide up onto this ridge here. So that was a fairly straightforward decision. The whole base of the cuff is designed around the existence of that shock pad. It's a design feature. It looks cool in terms of colorways when we change the color of the shock pad. It provides shock absorption. It's designed to fit inside the shell. So that's why we designed the new outsole to work in conjunction with that shock pad. The other thing that we wanted to do was to introduce some toe protection. We talked about the idea of having a composite or plastic piece that you could attach to the front of the sole plate. We talked about a hard plastic that could be attached to the outside of the shoe. Ultimately, we decided to go with what we've got, which is a rubber, pretty much a rubber extension of the toe cap, because it provides that balance between protecting the toe and still keeping it a fairly soft and flexible shoe. Shadows by design are an open shell skate, so we felt that if we started adding or enclosing the skate, adding things, there's more things that could potentially break. Plus, if we start closing the skate up and putting hard plastic on areas such as the toe, then it starts to become more and more like a normal hard shell skate, which is what we don't want. We want it to stay as a step-in open shell skate. So that's why we decided to find a compromise and a balance between comfort and offering just a little bit more toe protection by going with a rubberized toe cap. It did need it. Every now and then you do hit your toes. It is a concern for people who skate shadows, who have decided not to skate shadows anymore because of that fear or a reluctance to try them out in the first place, simply because they don't like the fact that their toes are exposed completely. So that's why we decided to put a little bit of protection there. In addition, some toe strap mounting ring bumpers were put in as well. So when the toe strap is tightened down and running up from the side of the sole plate on both 1.0 and 2.0 sole plate kits, that there was just a little bit more protection there for potential abrasion rubbing against the toe strap, and just to add a bit of comfort to it, which I think it actually works quite well. The other part of the outsole design was the base. I think it looks really cool. It's really simple, clean design. It's got the nice USD logo there. But the pattern specifically is designed so it offers as much grip as possible to the sole plate. And also the shape of it was designed around the 2.0 sole kit. So as much of the shoe is making contact with the sole plate as possible. As part of that design process, we also use a different last, which is basically the process that gives the shoe its shape to be a little bit wider in the toe box. So generally speaking, most of the feedback from people is that they're finding more space within the new outsole and the new last, which is really positive. So some people have managed to downsize. I myself am a have always historically been a 44, an EU 44 in the USD Shadow. I was a EU 44 for the team skate, so this is an EU 44. For this skate, I decided to try an EU 43, and I managed to fit that. It's a tight 43 for me. I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but I have managed to downsize from a 44 down to a 43. Going back to what I was saying before about the toe cap, because we do have this rubberized toe cap, instead of a hard plastic or a hard shell, it does provide a little bit more wriggle room when it comes to downsizing because it is still relatively soft. Yes, you still have that hard barrier of the rubber, but it is way more forgiving than what a hard shell would be. The other thing or design consideration for the high top shoe was the insole. So the last team skate came with a really thick insole, and I think the first sample here came with quite a thick insole as well. For this, I said that we just needed a very basic slim insole. Two reasons. One is that unlike other liners, this liner has a shoe sole on it. So you've already got a level of comfort and support from the outsole itself and shock absorption. In terms of shock absorption, you've also got the Shadow shock pad as well. So pretty much from a shock absorption perspective, you're well covered. Also trying to keep your heel as possible, close as possible to the sole plate. Again, using a slim insole. The other reason too is just to provide out of the box as much room inside the shoe as possible. Which means potentially, like myself, out of the box, if you've chosen to try and downsize, that you're giving yourself the best chance of having as much possible room inside the shoe to give you that best opportunity to downsize. You can't heat mold these as per traditional liners. However, that being said, I have chucked them in the oven for like 5 minutes at like 90 degrees Celsius. I hold no responsibility or liability if you decide to try and heat your shoes inside the oven. They will mold to your feet over time, but I just wanted to give myself just a little bit more room straight away. The reason why you can't heat mold is because the outsole, everything is basically affixed with stitching and or glues. So if you heat the glue up too much, then you've got the potential for your shoe to fall apart, which obviously you don't want. But they are designed to withstand certain heats and tolerances. So for me, I haven't ever had a problem. I think about 90 degrees Celsius for about 5 minutes was enough to heat it up, chuck the shoe on, lace it up, and just to give me that sort of immediate heat molding and comfort. Here we have version 2, which is obviously a lot better from V1. The main things that we wanted changed was using the nylon mesh on the outside. So the nylon mesh is a lot durable. Obviously this is pretty banged up now after sessioning it for a little bit. But the nylon mesh feels more premium, looks more premium, and doesn't stain as quickly as the wax canvas. The tongue was pretty much the same. I felt the tongue was pretty much bang on straight from the beginning. We had black laces on this one, which I think really ties in with the outsole. Got the 45-degree eyelet on this one, and the main difference is the height of the side. As you can see here, the height to tongue ratio is a lot better. So we're looking now in the realm of a really nice looking high top shoe, which is not super tall like the Eclipse liner, but not so low that it's just like a normal foot wrap. High top shoe, and we've got the tongue that performs as the tongue for the shoe, which you can walk around in, and then hop straight in the skate and it becomes your skate tongue as well. So that was, I guess, the other part of the design consideration in a high top shoe, is in trying to achieve a balance between a traditional foot wrap and the Eclipse liner, is maintaining that independent operation between the 45 degree and the tongue. So high top shoe, having the tongue perform as the tongue for the shoe and the tongue for skating. So I think from that perspective, having tested it, it works really well. It's a really sick looking high top shoe. There's a bit of a resurgence in high top shoe designs lately, which is really cool to see. I've been wearing these around as my daily shoes as much as possible, wearing them to the gym, wearing them for just day-to-day activities, which I couldn't do or didn't want to do with these. So from that perspective, I think we achieved our goal. From a skate perspective, it performs really well inside the skate. I think having the liner or the shoe come up a little bit higher just makes that connection or that break point between where the shoe finishes and the upper padding starts a little bit smoother. I can't, or at least in my experience, couldn't feel the transition, where previous versions with a low top shoe, you can kind of feel the transition from where the shoe finishes and where the padding starts. It still meant we needed to affix padding, which, you know, is extra parts and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, we still need cuff padding. There's no way around it unless we use the Eclipse liner. But I'll talk about the cuff padding in a minute, because we did make some modifications there as well. But going back to this, version 2 was pretty much on the money. It was, yeah, the height it needed to be, nylon mesh on the outside. Everything was looking pretty good. Really slim insole from the get-go. This one had that slim USD basic insole, which took us through to using the magic of editing. I'll probably fast forward this bit of me. And here we have it, version 3, or the final version. So I think, yeah, it's a really sick looking high top shoe. We've got the height ratio to tongue correct. The tongue is high enough. It's comfortable inside the skate. It does its job. You still have the option of putting your laces through the leather patch here if you want, but I've never really had to do that. Yeah, just overall, the final version, I guess the only major or minor difference is that we've got USD Shadow printed there on the bottom. But outside that, yeah, coming from V1, we were almost there. Now to the final version, which is perfect, in my opinion. Yeah, awesome. Keen to know your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did we get it right? Did we make a big mistake? If you purchased a pair and you've skated them, what do you think? I think overall it completes our lineup for the Shadow skate, in the sense that we've got our traditional, potentially our, you know, normal shoes, where the tongue will be integrated with the 45 degree binding. We've got the Eclipse liner, which we do away with the cuff padding, and the tongue is integrated. So we'll still probably offer that version. And then we've got something in between, which is a high top shoe with the tongue integrated both for skating and for walking. That being said, there's nothing to say that we can't do a high top shoe, but use just a normal shoe tongue inside the shoe, and then still have the skate tongue integrated with the 45 degree. We've for sure got that option. So overall, we've got a really sweet lineup, I think, in terms of our internal shoe / liner options for the Shadow skate. I guess I'll work in reverse from this point onwards from the top, because it makes sense, because it does relate to the liner or the high top shoe. The next part I looked at was the cuff padding. Having the carry strap on the actual skate is always handy, so that was a no-brainer. In terms of the shape, I modified it a little bit because previous versions of the cuff padding can be or have been incredibly thick, perhaps unnecessarily, particularly around the back where the shoe meets the back of the skate. What that does is, if you've got really thick padding at the back of the cuff here, combined with the padding on the back of the shoe, then the shoe or the liner ends up sitting quite a distance forward inside the skate. That's not what you want. You want the skate and your heel to sit as far back as designed within the shell. The other reason too is to achieve that heel lock. If the skate is or the shoe is pushed forward inside the shell, then you're not going to achieve that heel lock. So for this padding, modified it so we removed some padding around the back to provide enough room for and factor that in so the liner went as far back inside the shell, both for performance and to achieve that heel lock. We still maintained the shape at the front just for aesthetics, so it still looked good. We've also, for this particular model, had it continually run where you've got these padding fins, I guess, running down the side. That's mainly to provide a bit of extra comfort against the cuff bolt hardware, but also to stop abrasion against your liner. So without that, it would have been exposed to the cuff bolt hardware and rubbing against your liner, which would have eventually torn it, which is, you don't want that either. So yeah, bit of a balance there between providing practical comfort and protection against hardware, but also eliminating what we don't need so the liner can sit as far back inside the skate. The top layer of padding was also quite thick, so I asked them to use a slightly thinner material. So that's why you might notice on this particular model, it feels, when you flex, it does feel more comfortable in my opinion, more forgiving. It's still comfortable and offers protection against the plastic of the edge of the cuff, but it's not, certainly not as harsh as what I would say it felt previously. It's way more comfortable when you're doing forward and lateral flex. So that's a win, I think. Slightly thinner, slightly lower profile, just as comfortable and a little more forgiving. Next design consideration was what to use, the age-old question as to what to use for the buckle enclosure. Initial design had just a power slide, I think it's Prime ALU buckle, which was fine, it did the job. But when I saw the Kaiser memory buckle, I thought I would test that out and see how it goes. So the reason why I selected this for this model, for a couple of reasons. It's got a metal plate, metal base plate. It's got a metal head, which means that there's just, in my view, less potential for it to crack like some other buckles. The memory buckle option is really cool, I think, because depending on how you set up your toe strap, everything opens the same way. So if you set it all up and then open it that way, everything now opens the same way, which I found quite neat. So when you come out of the skate, it all opens that way. When you get back in, put it in, and then it all closes back the other way. And then obviously the memory component of it is pretty cool. So you don't have to remember each and every time you strap up. The final production version will have this set a little bit further forward. The strap for the memory buckle only comes in 2 sizes, and I felt that it was just potentially a little bit short for some people. So that's why I asked the factory to move the receiver a little bit further forward, put in an extra hole so it could sit a bit further forward, just provide a little bit extra length to the strap for those that like to wear their buckles really loose. Yeah, I'm one of those people. I felt it just needed just a little bit more, a little less or a little more clicks, just so it was just running a little bit looser. The other thing that I liked about this buckle too is it didn't pop open. So I tested it quite a bit in China, and when I got back, trying to make it pop open, and I couldn't get it to pop open. Not saying it's not going to do it, but it certainly did it a lot less or not at all. It didn't do it at all for me, but I'm sure people will somehow get it to pop open. But that's what I really liked about that buckle, and that's why I decided to go with it. Let me know what you think. If you happen to cop a pair of these and test them out, or you've tested it on the Sam Croft, the recent Sam Croft Aeon, what do you think of the memory buckle? Is it a good buckle, or should we just stick with straps for future Shadow models? So I was testing a strap, not a 360 strap. Having a 360 on the hinged cuff, I don't think would have, looked that good. So I was testing just a normal Velcro strap. It felt quite good. Having that adjustability to where you wanted to set it. Pretty much using a modified version of the one we've been using on all our models lately. This is off the EE2. But yeah, I thought the Velcro strap worked quite well. So what do you think? Should we do Velcro straps moving forward on all our Shadow models, or is the memory buckle cool? Or would you like to see a different buckle setup? Let me know in the comments. For the upper cuff, we extended the buckle protection ridges, so they now stick out a little bit more. I just felt it's always good to have more protection against smashing against your buckle, so that's why we extended those a little bit. It also, if we did, or you were going to roll with straps, it does provide a lot more protection for the straps, because straps are obviously low profile. So from that perspective, having those additional wings stick out, those wings stick out a bit more, it's really good from my perspective in terms of ensuring that whatever enclosure you're using at the top of the cuff is well protected. Very minor modification we made too is the hole where the cuff bolt protrudes through was actually wider in diameter than it needed to be. What I think was happening is because of that mismatch between the cuff bolt receiver and the hole it needed to go into, there was a lot of movement, which meant that the upper cuff had the potential to loosen, or the upper cuff bolt had the potential to loosen a lot faster. So that's a nice little change. Hoping that will help keep the cuff bolt tightened for longer. With hinged cuff bolts, you're always going to have them come loose at some point. So that's why I always encourage, as soon as you get a new skate, to have some Loctite handy and take off your cuff bolt and put that Loctite on and tighten it back up, just to provide you as much hassle-free skating as possible. Speaking of the cuff bolt, you may have noticed that there's no hole on this one. We were considering, or at least the original design had riveted cuff bolts as the design. Mainly because sick of cuff bolts coming loose. On this particular model too, they do tend to come loose unless you put that Loctite on. So we were seriously considering hinged cuff bolts, riveted cuff bolts, which I was really excited about until after a short period of time, they started to rattle. Now what I think happened is when I was flexing, it bent the rivet slightly, which loosened it up. We were looking at potentially doing a stronger version of the rivet, but it was just going to take more time, and the skate was already taking long, as it was already delayed as it was, so decided to can that idea and just go with the traditional USD cuff bolt, which I still think looks awesome, and like I said, with Loctite and that modification to the hole should provide plenty of sessions without the stress of the cuff bolt coming loose. But yeah, just made that decision because I think what's worse than a cuff bolt coming loose or having to retighten a cuff bolt is a riveted cuff bolt that rattles and you can't fix it without having to tool it and snap it and drill it out and replace it with another part. So that's why we made that decision. Who knows, in the future, when we get a stronger rivet part for the cuff, we might explore that again, but for this model we decided at the end of the day to go with the traditional USD cuff bolt. For the lower cuff, we modified the flex fins to provide a little less forward flex. One of the feedback or consistent feedback for the 2.0 cuff over the years is it's got incredible forward flex. Now, forward flex is awesome. I love forward flex. Many people love forward flex. But this cuff in particular had no end point. So what I mean by that is it basically just kept flexing forward. And sometimes if you flex forward far enough, the fins would pop out. That's fantastic for doing topside and just overall flexibility of the skate. But what it also meant is if you leant a little bit too far forward during a landing or during a trick, then the skate had a tendency to overflex sometimes. And that was where some of the feedback or complaints come from, I guess. So what we wanted to do was to address that a little bit, still provide forward flex or enough forward flex, not eliminate it. So it still maintained the feel of the original 2.0 cuff and also maintain the fans of this cuff, which I am a big fan of this cuff, which is why we modified this to provide less forward flex. So it still provides forward flex. It's a lot tighter. It doesn't look like much probably on camera. It looks like there isn't any, but the nature of the Shadow skate in terms of its binding open shell design means that there is inherently a level of forward flex just by design. When we tighten this up, it now provides more forward flex than the 1.0 cuff, which basically has none, except for what's provided in the design of the skate, but still provides a point of difference between the 1.0 and the 2.0 cuff. So if I was to describe, so 1.0 cuff is, I would say, super flexy laterally with almost no forward flex. The 2.0 cuff now with these modifications, I would say, feels like a 1.0 cuff with some forward flex and enough lateral flex to still do top sides, but a lot more supportive laterally than the 1.0 cuff. So there's, I think, enough of a distinction between the two to provide those options. And I'm biased, but I think that is one of the best things about this product is that you've got a choice of two cuff options that offer quite a distinct feel. So if one doesn't work, then you can try the other and you find what works for you. In terms of the shock pad, there's no real change. It didn't need to be changed. I don't feel. It achieves its function. It looks cool. Just the little design features where it sticks out. Black shock absorber. So I didn't really feel there was a need to make any changes in that regard. Moving down to the sole plate, we did modify the sole plate for this model again. I'll just highlight the change we made on the last model, just for those who might not be aware. We extended the material around the toe strap mounting points just to provide a bit more longevity out of those points, which have a tendency to get hit the most when skating. So if you wear through those parts here and snap the toe strap mounting rings, then there goes your session and there goes your sole plate. So we wanted to make sure that we provided some extra longevity there. For this model, we widened the arc or the path in which the rear of the sole plate cuts from rear to the front. So as you might be able to see it on camera, but there's just a little bit more of a gap here where that sole plate runs down the side of the shoe. On the previous version, depending on your size of your foot, the size of the sole plate, this edge was quite harsh and it was making contact with the liner or your shoe. So much so it was causing abrasion. In Eugen's case, he actually tore through that part of his shoe because there was that much contact being made there. It also is particularly noticeable if you've got wide feet. As I mentioned earlier, we actually now use a wider fit for the liners in the shoes, which means that your foot packs out a bit more when it's inside the skeleton. It's got that room to pack out more widthways, which means more comfortable and it fills the sole plate more, but it allows, particularly in this area, it allows that foot to pack out a bit more. So in that case, some people were having the sole plate almost resting against their foot, which is not ideal. So we made a modification to the mold across the four 2.0 sole plate sizes there, just to cut a wider arc. It's really hard to tell that it's been done. You might be able to tell, but it's almost, if you hold them side by side, it almost looks exactly the same. But rest assured, we have made a mold change there and there should be a lot more room down here if people were experiencing sort of discomfort or contact previously. The other thing we did, it's more, I guess, from a manufacturing perspective rather than a skater's perspective, but we did over-inject the UFS mounting point in the front there. So it's just integrated cleaner with the sole plate. Rather than using the tiny fixing screw, sometimes the tiny fixing screw would fall out. It's a bit of a pain, so it's just a small thing to keeping it clean, tidy, integrated with the sole plate, which I just think was a nice touch overall. Moving up to the binding, we've gone with the Eugen Innen inspired binding / Damien Wilson inspired binding, where the 45 is connected all the way down with the toe piece or the toe pad as well. Quite a few people requested or thought this is a better looking and more comfortable option for the platform. So that's why I've decided, personally also think it's quite good, decided to go with it for this model. USD logo there, all white, black highlights. No change around the inside in terms of the thumb screw fixation with the hold strap, but we did make changes on the outside. The material that we use for the ratchet strap is more flexible, meaning that it should be less prone to breakages. So quite a few people are experiencing snappages with this ratchet strap. Not sure why, temperature, heavy use, but consistently it seemed to be when a trick was missed and the obstacle would catch the edge of the binding or the plastic here and tear it away, and that sudden force would just snap it. So first thing was to change the material to try and make it more durable, so if it did experience that sudden force that it wouldn't snap. Sent that out to a few people who had that problem, and those people didn't experience any snappages with that part, and until today I haven't had any feedback to suggest otherwise, so that's good. But we didn't stop there. We also wanted to modify this part because the mold had been modified previously as part of, I guess, a slimming down exercise to reduce the amount of material used. But what that did, in my view, is expose the force buckle to more damage because it is kind of a high impact area. So we raised the protection fins here, and as you can see on this one, might be a bit hard to see, but as you can see, I've scraped it along those protection fins there, and I pretty much have that. I mean, there's a scratch or two, but that force buckle is a lot more protected than it previously was, which is a big win. Always good to have that, and also stops inadvertent bumping, which is again isn't ideal when it comes to the binding system. You don't want that coming undone mid-trick. So that all that works really well in terms of protection, both from accidental opening and damage to the buckle. The other thing that we did too was put in a bridge here between the two parts. Previously, this bridge wasn't here. It was just like two forks coming out, and that was predominantly what got caught when a trick was missed and potentially causing that snappage. So that bridge there now is held down by the ratchet strap, which means that if you do miss, it's pulling against that bridge and not causing a torsional twist. So again, between those changing material of the ratchet strap and that bridge, we should really see I'm not saying it could never happen, but we should see a marked reduction in the accidental snappage. But what do you think? Happy with these mods? Should we change up the whole binding system, or should we go to a Velcro 45-degree binding system? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I guess the only issue with a Velcro system, because I have, been toying with ideas and designs, is that a Velcro system is based on potentially the grip strength of the person who's using it. So some people might not be able to pull the Velcro tight enough in the first instance to get it tight enough for their liking. So that's why the force buckle works quite well. It's really easy to use. It's quite a strong buckle. And with these modifications, we should see, like I said, reduction in damage to the buckle. Overall, it should be quite a secure system now. The other change we made with this is that we added a Velcro piece to the toe strap area, just for the toe strap to meet, to provide an extra connection point, which is always good to stop things moving around as much as possible. In terms of the toe strap material, there are a few comments out there that the current material that we've been using isn't strong enough, that people were going through them in one session, which again isn't ideal. So we looked at material and went basically with what we've been using on the cuff strap material, which is a seatbelt style material. So we switched over to a seatbelt material for the toe strap, which should provide a longer lasting toe strap. I did an abrasion test with both this and the old one, and just on a rough concrete ledge, just rubbing it against it. And the new material, the seatbelt nylon material, lasted longer. It lasted way longer before it broke through against the old one. So yeah, if you happen to cop a pair and test it out, let me know what you think. Is it lasting? What other ideas or other materials do you think we should use for the toe strap if this one isn't meeting your expectations? Moving down to the frame, myself personally am an anti-rocker skater, so I very much prefer the Kaiser Fluid 4, which came on the last team skate. There's a bit of a rationale as to why, despite whether or not people skate flat or anti-rocker, that we chose to go with, or why we consistently kind of go with the Fluid 5 for skate models. There's a couple of reasons. One is that the Fluid 5 is actually a pretty good flat frame out of the box. There's a whole range of flat frames on the market. Everyone's got, I guess, their personal preference as to what their favorite is. But all things being said and done, the Fluid 5 is a pretty solid flat frame out of the box. So that's, I guess, the first reason. The second reason is it coming flat means that if you do skate flat, then you can skate flat out of the box. If you prefer anti-rocker, then you're welcome to put on an anti-rocker frame, and then you've got basically 2 sets of wheels. These come with ABEC 9 bearings, so they're fast rolling and they're reasonably durable for a stock wheel. And like I said, if you skate anti-rocker and you swap over straight away, then you've got 2 sets of wheels to burn through before you're potentially having to look at buying another set of wheels. The other thing is that this frame was designed after the Kaiser Fluid 3, which, you know, when you wear a groove in, you can turn this into a pretty decent anti-rocker frame. So yeah, it can be skated flat, but with a bit of work and a bit of wearing in, you can turn it into a pretty decent anti-rocker frame as well. Not as good as the Fluid 4, but it just provides options for people straight out of the box, for those who skate flat, for those who are happy to wear it into an anti-rocker or skate them anti-rocker. For those people, then you've got an extra set of wheels to go to. Speaking of the wheels, we went with a 92A on the inner and a 90A hardness on the outer. The reason for that is not a big flat person myself. Speaking with some of the guys around here, is that 92, the difference in wheel bite between 92A and 95A is pretty negligible, but the difference in ride comfort is noticeable, particularly if you're riding all 95 or all 92. So 92 is kind of a sweet spot. And then we went with 90A on the outside, just to provide overall, between the 92A in the center and the 90A on the outside, a balance between having a comfortable ride but offering just a little bit more wheel protection in the center, as opposed to just going with a 90A all the way through, providing just a little bit more wheel bite protection with 92A in the center. And then on top of that, a slightly harder wheel. Again, if you're going with an anti-rocker, then a 90 and a 92 hardness wheel will last you a little bit longer if you are having to use them as an anti-rocker setup. The other thing too that propped up during the design process is my first sample here. I'm not sure if it's super obvious on the camera. It's certainly obvious to me standing here looking at them both, but the first sample, the white was off-white. It looked like a white skate. It looked like how a white skate ends up after 6 or 12 months of skating. That horrible off-white color, which, you know, is basically inevitable when it comes to white skates, but it's looked like that straight out of the box. So that was one of the first things that I asked the team to really look at, this color's not acceptable. They come back and said, well, we're not going to be able to match all the whites. That's fine, no dramas. I acknowledge that, you know, there's a lot of white parts, materials, different makeups and that sort of thing. So to match all the whites, it's not going to be possible, but definitely for the plastic, this off-white was no good. And if, you know, that was going to be the case, I'd probably change the whole colorway at that point. Thankfully, when the final sample came through, I was stoked, because the white is a proper white. It pops. It's like that Stormtrooper white. There's obviously some tiny variance between the sole plate and the upper parts, but, you know, when you're mixing and different compounds for different purposes, some need to flex, some need to grind, then there's some inevitability in coloration, particularly if it's white against white. But overall, I was super stoked to see the difference from the first sample to the final sample, and that being like this really nice poppy white. Noting, of course, it'll take one session for it to turn to trash, but at least out of the box, it looks pretty mint in my opinion. So there you have it. The USD Shadow Team White for 2026. In-depth overview from a design perspective. I hope you got something out of that. I hope you've watched the speaking specs video, which is obviously a lot shorter and doesn't go into as much detail, but thanks for watching this, and let me know in the comments what you think. Should we do more videos like this where we really go into the nitty-gritty and design decisions around shadow skates? If you really dig it, then I'll keep making them, because shadows are the best skates, in my opinion. Thanks for watching. Cheers.